Welcome to this month's Access Control Coaching Session. My name is Cole Nebeker. I am the Training and Events Manager here at PDK. We have these coaching sessions once a month about frequently requested topics. In this one, we are going to be talking about group and system events. So, without further ado, if you do have any questions or want to see more videos like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button. I almost forgot. But yes, let's go ahead and jump right into the demonstration. All right. So we are going to start here from our main customer page. You can see here if we navigate to the System and Events section, we already have some. My video is kind of blocking it off, but there is a plus button in the bottom right-hand corner there that you can click to create a new system event. We're going to go ahead and name it and give it a partition if necessary or even applicable for your system, at which point we can create the schedule. Now we do have these three kinds of schedules that we can program. We've got always, recurring, and single date. Always is of course going to be 24/7, 365, whereas recurring is going to be a recurring weekday and time associated with that. And then single date's pretty common for things like holidays where you may just have a one-off deal. Okay, so I'll go through these one by one, kind of showing you what each of them looks like. If you are doing the recurring, you will select the time and the days. Keep in mind that this is military time. I think that throws a lot of people off. So you can see here, if I do 6, that is 6 a.m., not 6 p.m. So be sure to come back and correct that to 1800 as opposed to 6. All right, now going through the triggers, we have a wide list of options. We have on open to start with, and you can see we go through, we have quite a lot of these. These are going to be your if statements. All right, so we're going to start here with our most commonly programmed system events. So the idea behind these is going to be if this, then that. So first we're going to start with an onRex open if statement and a, what did I end up programming here? An open/close. So this is going to be your Rex rule. So your Rex rule is going to be required from a system to system. I can't read the comments while I'm live. I'll end up laughing. Thanks, Brock. There is, when you program a door, you are going to need to program the Rex and tell it what to do. So I think a lot of people, when they first program a system, they just expect the Rex to do Rex things. And that's fine if it's tied in directly to your locking hardware. But if you're using the software to program a Rex rule, you're going to have to keep in mind that you need to program a system event to actually do something with the door, tell the system what to do. So in this case, we're doing if a Rex is open or if a Rex is closed. It just depends whether you wire it as a normally open or normally closed contact. Open/close. And you can see we have a delay and a dwell time typically programmed for either 3 or 5 seconds, at which point we can select our source devices and target devices. So the neat thing about the PDK system is you can target different source and target doors. Meaning that you can receive an input on one door and target an entirely different door on the system altogether. So most times you'll just do same as the source devices, but you can see here I programmed with 2 source devices and just a single target device. All right, next up is a lockdown. So it's going to be a similar input, except I'm going to change it to onRex close. So that is a contact that we would have on the button and a lockdown on. Now, a lockdown is especially applicable within vulnerable communities such as churches, universities, schools, campuses, things of that nature. And lockdown on is a fairly permanent action. You can program it to be overridden by a group event if you wish. So keep that in mind. There is a way to disable this for authorized emergency responders, whatever the case is. But a lockdown on will enable you to initiate a lockdown that will not let your typical users through those doors. Same deal, select your source devices and target devices, and you can just check the box if you want to select the same as the source devices. There is a dwell box there if you do want to select a specific dwell time. And then our third one and our final one for the common system events is a door propped alarm. We have a specific trigger called onPropped. This will be configured in the configuration page where you select how long a door needs to remain propped open for it to go into propped status. And then at the bottom we have sound piezo and silence piezo. Now keep in mind that this is sending a command to something connected via OSDP, such as a red reader. So if you do not have a red reader and you're instead going to be utilizing a piezo on one of our legacy devices, you will need a secondary relay, at which point you can use an open/close command on that second relay to cross-target that. But if you are using a red reader, it's pretty straightforward. You can configure it in repeated beeps or custom. The repeated beeps will just go anywhere from 0 to 255. So if you try to do 500, it's not going to let you. And the custom will allow you to select how long the beeps are, how long is between each of the beeps, and so on and so forth. Okay, now getting into the triggers. We are going to start here. I have to type it out first, of course. All right, we're going to start with onOpen. So I'm going to change the action to something that is a little more common, such as send an email. But onOpen and onClose is going to be in relation to your DPS. So that just determines if a door is ever opened or if a door is ever closed. All right, next up we have our propped, which we covered briefly here in the commonly programmed system events. A propped is just configured in the configuration tab where you say 60, 30, 120 seconds, whatever the case is how long a door needs to remain open for it to go into propped status. And then we can also do an onForced, which means that there was no kind of credential input or any kind of Rex input from that door, indicating that it was either forced open or somebody maybe used a manual key to get through that door. Then we have the opposite of propped. We have onProp cleared and onAllProp cleared. So the difference between these is an onProp cleared just means it just needs one of the, whatever you define the source device as, to have the prop cleared. AllProp cleared requires all of the doors on the system to have their propped alarm status cleared. Say that 10 times fast. OnRex open and OnRex close is just your Rex input, the B terminal on PDK boards. And again, this is just dependent on whether you have the Rex input wired as a normally open or normally closed contact. If you don't know which one it is, that's fine. I didn't know most of the times in support, so I would just toggle between the two until it worked. So no harm in just trying that. All right, we've got credentials input, which is any credentials input. So I want to emphasize that this is not necessarily a secure option, a secure system event. This will read any credential input. So don't trigger a door to open and close with on credentials input, because somebody could come in off the street and swipe their badge and they will be allowed in. Not ideal for security purposes. That is any credentials input. On credentials not found may have a little more use, where the credentials are badged at a door but they're not found anywhere within the system. On comm loss, now we're getting into more of our diagnostics. So on comm loss and on comm loss cleared, that is just a communication loss between the head end unit and the controllers. So we are, that is going to be more diagnostic. It just means that we're not receiving any communications back between a controller. So it's important to know that, and our comm loss cleared just means that that communication was restored. We also have duress. There is a field in people, which I don't show in this video, but it is a duress pin. So if there is a duress pin entered for a person, you can have it send an email. Very useful if you want to have a distress pin. More of our diagnostics, we have input power loss and input power recovery. It is worth noting that the controller still needs to be online to report on this, so that will typically be covered by having a battery backup on the controller. So the controller can notify the cloud-based software saying, hey, this controller just lost input power. And then, of course, the opposite of that is input power recovery, meaning that input power was restored. Going into overcurrent, that's pretty self-explanatory. It just means that you have too much current going through your controller. And then on overcurrent cleared, just means that you no longer have overcurrent going through your controller. The exact opposite of that, we have underpower input detected, and then underpowered input cleared as well. Just indicating that you now have sufficient power. That's typically done when you have some kind of low battery status. We've got low power mode on and low power mode off, which again is just going to mean that you have a low powered alarm going on. We have battery connect and disconnect. Again, pretty straightforward, just means your backup battery is either connected or disconnected. Circuit breakers. Now, circuit breakers are not what you think they are, probably, unless you're smarter than I was when I learned this, which I was, I would not like to admit was much further on than I thought. Circuit breakers don't relate to the power. This is in relation to the A and B inputs. This just means that you received, I believe the number is more than 40 inputs within 30 seconds, which typically indicates that there is a short somewhere in the system. So just like your typical electrical circuit breaker, it trips and says, hey, there's an issue here. We're receiving too many REX or DPS inputs, and prevents any further inputs from occurring. So you can configure the circuit breaker on and off so that you know if you potentially have a short in the system. All right, and our final trigger is going to be partial connectivity and partial connectivity cleared. That is in relation to the WiMAC. Just means that it is missing a few pings, just indicating that you may have poor signal strength. Okay, so that covers it for the triggers. And again, these are your if statements. So now we're going to go over to actions. I'm going to select a fairly common trigger. Our first action is send an email. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, you can see our email template right here. We have selected our source devices right up top, and now we are able to configure our email template. So in this, we are able to enter whatever text we want to enter into this field. And then on top of that, we can add in our own custom variable. So I'm going to add them one by one here. And I do have, my eyesight is going, so I'm going to try to read these on the small screen here. We have time, and that is going to record the time at which this system event occurred. We have log door, so if it is applicable to a door, it will log which door is in question right there. We have log event, which will record the event associated with this system event, the result of the system event. And then we have our info. So if there is any info text associated with it, it'll record right there. Log our card number. Again, not always applicable because there's not always a card associated with a system event. Sometimes it's just a system input. A name of the system event, and the log IO link, which is the link to the system event. So it's all pretty straightforward there. You just need to go through, set up the body of the email, your subject, and then select your recipient. So if you hit plus right next to recipients, it'll show you everyone who has access to this system automatically. Since there's a lot in here, you can also just type in a custom email address, or if they're not somebody who manages the system, you can add them in yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and send this email template to myself. All right. The action do not disturb is, it looks pretty similar to a system lockdown, but it is a little bit different because it is a one input trigger, or I'm sorry, action. So when you press it, it goes into the opposite mode of what it previously was. Excuse me. So if you hit do not disturb while a door is not in do not disturb, it goes into do not disturb. If you hit do not disturb again, it comes out of do not disturb. That's what I mean there. So unlike a system lockdown where you have to have a dedicated lockdown on and lockdown off command, this one just goes into the opposite of whatever the door was previously in. If you do want to do a dwell, you can do that as well. A force toggle is similar, if I can talk, when you trigger it, it just goes into the opposite state of whatever the door was in. And this is a very powerful command because it can force a door to go into the opposite of whatever it was currently in. Similarly, we have a force open and a force close. If you need to get more specific, if you don't want a door to force open, you only want it to force close, you can use the force close command instead of a force toggle, which just goes into the opposite status of whatever the door currently is. All right, going down to the next one, we have a lockdown on and a lockdown off. These are fairly permanent, but worth noting that you can create rules that allow people to get through lockdown doors. They just have to have the correct permissions. We have a standard open and close. So these do not override forced commands, but they can open a standard locked door if need be and close respectively. Open/close has a built-in delay and dwell time. So if you're writing a Rex rule, for example, you need it to configure to unlock the door for 5 seconds, but you don't want to just leave the door open, of course. You can use the open/close command. And then the final two we have are sound and silence piezo. And again, we've got the repeated beeps and the custom beeps where you can configure how long the beep sounds, how much time is between them, and how many beeps there are total. And then a counter to that is silencing the piezo, which is often a blessing. So that's the idea behind this. And again, I want to reemphasize that this is, it may look complex, but it really is nothing more than an if this happens, then do this statement, which a lot of people are familiar with as you go through and configure these kinds of things. Or if you're familiar with programming, you just say, if this happens, then do this. So just be sure to select the correct source and target devices. Again, you can target different source and target devices on a system. All right, going back to Midwest Enterprises, we have covered system events. We're now going to go over to group events. So if we go into groups, I've already created a group here called group events. We're going to create a new rule. Now, these group events only apply to the members within the group. So this is nice if you need to configure a lockdown off command. You can put only emergency responders in this group, and now only the people in this group can disable a lockdown. That's just an example, of course. But if we create a rule, we have access, elevator, event, and anti-passback. We're going to go to the event page. You'll notice it looks very similar. We go ahead and name it, similar to system events. We have our schedules down below, where we can select always, recurring, and single date. And then we just go ahead and program it just like we did with group events. Now you'll notice that the triggers are different. So instead of being related or pertaining to system events, these are more pertaining to access events. So we've got things like when allowed, when denied, though I'm going to go through the differences there. Always, on multi-swipe, on duress, on anti-passback violation. So we're going to go ahead and go through these one by one, starting with triggers. So first is when allowed, which is pretty self-explanatory. If somebody is allowed access through that door, you can perform a certain action, which I am going to set to send email for the time being. You'll notice that the template is the same down there at the bottom. Same variables, exact same variables, and same templates. So you can configure it in the exact same way you did under system events. And then you can select your source devices as well as your recipients associated with the emails. We go down to the next one. We have when denied explicit. So this means that somebody was explicitly denied. They don't just not have rules. They were told specifically in the system that they were not allowed access. Whether that be because the rules were set to a deny rule or if their profile's disabled, doesn't matter. They were explicitly denied access. Whereas our other denied trigger is no rules, meaning that, whoops, somebody forgot to put them into the system. No big deal. We have always on valid credentials. So valid credentials are going to be anything valid within the system. And then we've got our multi-swipe 2, 3, and 4 swipes. This allows us to create 3 separate rules based on multi-swipe input. And that's just meaning that you swipe a card twice at a door, 3 times at a door, or 4 times at a door. I don't know how many times I just swiped. That allows you to program 3 separate rules on those kinds of input. On duress is again pulling from a duress pin, but from somebody within this group. And then we have our anti-passback violation. I do have a video on the knowledge base which covers anti-passback in more detail because it would be probably a lot to cover within this video. But if somebody violates their anti-passback rule, you can configure an action to take place. You'll notice that the actions are exactly the same. There are no differences between the actions on the system events and the group events. So just kind of going through, showing you that they are in fact the exact same. There's no differences there. You will just go through and complete the appropriate action based off of the trigger that you have. And again, email templates, I think, are probably the most commonly used kind of system and group event. So for example, an unknown person, you may come through here and create an email. Somebody's trying to get in where you can create a trigger of when denied explicit, initiate a lockdown, send an email. Maybe they don't have any rules, and so you want to send yourself an email notification on that. It's all pretty straightforward. You just configure whatever you need within the system, and the system will accomplish that. All right, so just going through a few common scenarios here of individuals trying to gain access and maybe not having access. Just kind of spitballing on what kinds of situations you may all have. But for the most part, that is system events and group events. So I guess if anybody has any questions, I know people have had questions because Brock was distracting me earlier in the video. So I'm going to go ahead and read through some of these comments, and as I'm reading through them, be sure to leave your own questions, comments in the chat bar to the right-hand side of the video, and we can cover through some of those. All right, good morning. The one I was laughing at, Cole, watch out, there is a Yoda behind you. I was not aware. So thank you for the heads up. Can you set up a holiday schedule with system events? Technically, yes. Yes, you technically could. It would just be easier probably to configure a holiday schedule underneath an auto open schedule. But yes, you can create a holiday schedule for certain system events within the system events or even group events page using that single date functionality that I briefly showed. I didn't go in much depth on that, but you can select a specific calendar date as well as times, and then that system or group event will only apply to that holiday. And Brock, technically that's Ding Grogu, not Yoda. And Benji, you're absolutely correct. This is the way. Is there ever a reason to not use a DPS? I don't think so. And I think you should always use a DPS. I guess that's kind of my opinion. Maybe not necessarily an opinion shared by everyone in the industry, but it's just so useful and cost effective that I think everybody should be using a DPS to generate some kind of propped alarm, especially for security purposes, or some kind of forced alarm as well. I think DPS sensors are very much worth the cost. All right, what would be an example of when to use on credentials input trigger if you wanted anybody to accomplish a certain action? Maybe you want any credential input to be able to initiate a lockdown. I know that's kind of a reach. I don't see it much. I haven't seen it much in the past, but that just is if you want anybody to accomplish any one of those actions, especially if it's not security related. The top 3 most used system events are those ones that I covered. You've got your Rex input. That is the one that support has mentioned is most commonly missed, especially with new installers, because they go in and they just assume that the Rex is going to open and close the door. And the software is designed intentionally to only accomplish the actions which have been programmed into it. So if you do have, say, a mag lock tied into a push button tied directly into the line, sure, it'll release. That's no problem. But if you do have a request to exit tied in via software, then you will need to make sure that you have a system event programmed. Other common ones are going to be door propped alarms for security purposes, as I've mentioned. And then again, at some of those secure facilities, you need to have a lockdown command. Otherwise, probably the most common system and group events are notification events. I've seen that a lot, especially at HOAs where they need to know the going-ons of their community. A lot of them will program emergency messages to go out to key people in the community or HOA. So the send email and notifications is going to be a huge one as well, regardless of what the trigger is. Okay, Ryan responded. You can have the blah, blah, blah. What permissions are required in order to get through a lockdown? Good question. So you have to either have access to the software to manually disable the lockdown door by door, or you just need to be a part of the group with specific group permissions, excuse me, saying when allowed, lockdown off at that door, allowing you to get through that door. So you can just program a few key individuals to be able to override a lockdown with their credentials. How do I set up groups for elevator floors? That's a good question. So elevators are done a little bit differently from doors. So what you do is you program floor relays and elevator readers within configuration. But before going straight to groups like you would with doors, you first need to make a detour over to the elevators tab, which does not show up unless you have elevators. So if you go back and watch the software, you'll notice that this system does not have elevators in it because it only shows up once you configure it. You go in there and you configure your groups. You basically assign a reader to a certain set of floors and say that this elevator group can access these floors, and you define those floors. And then you go up to groups and you just basically drop and drag and drop the elevator groups into the groups tab. So it has one extra location that you stop at first, and then you go up to groups because they are configured slightly differently from doors. All right. Dude, throwing me under the bus? Absolutely, I will throw you under the bus any day of the week, Brock. And then Tom, when is the next access control coaching session? It is September, somebody, 3rd? Thanks, Jordan. It is September 3rd. It is the first, today's Tuesday, right? Yeah, it is the first Tuesday of every month. I don't know what planet I'm living on half the time, so I appreciate Jordan helping me out with that. It is the first Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 9 a.m. Pacific, what is that, 11 Central and noon Eastern. Not very good at math either. So you can always tune in at those times. Next time, I believe it's going to be reporting in live events, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be our next topic. So always feel free to tune in and subscribe as well, because that will notify you of any upcoming live events. And I'm in trouble with Brock now. He's gonna fire me, so I'm gonna have to go to his office after this video is done. And then Tom, I've heard about this ProConnect Roadshow. I'm gonna do a shameless plug here about the Roadshow. The Roadshow is going to also be a once a month event. We're going to be hosting them in various U.S. cities that our RSDs have outlined as key hotspots for our partners. And we're going to have trainings. We're going to have an expo booth kind of a deal with manufacturers and distributors from the industry. and then we're going to have an activity. So for example, our first one, Phoenix, is coming up shortly here. It's on August 22nd. It's going to be down in Phoenix, so sign up if you're down in that area. But we're going to be hosting it downtown. We're going to have a bunch of great trainings. We have, I believe, 15 manufacturers and distributors that are going to be in attendance. So it's a great networking event. But really, the goal behind it is to show appreciation to our partners. So we encourage everyone and anyone to come. It's completely free of charge for everyone who shows up. And we will feed you, and we will have a poker night at the end of the night with some awesome raffle prizes. So yeah, it's going to be a good time. Brock has noted that he will not be firing me. He will just be adding extra work onto my workload. So I appreciate that. Anything to improve every day, Brock, you know me. So I guess that's it. If you did have any questions that we didn't get around to, or you didn't drop them in the comments in time, or you're just watching this after the fact, you can always reach out to the sales team, sales@ProdataKey.com. They are very knowledgeable about the system, and they would be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about this or any other topic. So that's it for this session. We will catch you next time in September, and we appreciate you tuning in.